Sooner or later, your garden will likely become an irresistible buffet to some of those smaller mammal pests, such as gophers and groundhogs and squirrels and raccoons and chipmunks and moles and voles and more. So in this video, we're going to talk about practical ways to control some of those smaller mammal pests to keep them from getting into your garden and ruining your plants. Now, when it comes to preventing mammal pests from getting into where you don't want them to go, the only real successful way to do that is with a physical barrier. But repellents can work, but they're temporary and some work better than others, and in all cases, they have to be reapplied eventually. So back to that physical barrier, that's your best bet every time. But even then, it has to be tall enough, wide enough, and the spacing within the barrier has to be small enough to prevent whatever it is you're trying to keep out from getting in. Now, sometimes a simple barrier can do the trick. And visit my garden any time of the year, and you're going to see these livestock or cattle panels at work somewhere. These were used to trellis my tomatoes growing out of my straw bales and grow bags. Of course, I use them to trellis my vining crops like my peas, and I always use them for my tomato cages, but I always have leftover pieces as well. So when I noticed that my raised beds were constantly being dug into by our free-range chickens and squirrels and even our barn cats, I was getting pretty tired of that. So I thought about using those leftover pieces and just laying them across the raised beds as a physical deterrent and barrier from those animals being able to do what they want to do. And you know what? After about 6 years, they've worked like a charm. So about those livestock panels. This is a cattle panel. You get them at the farm and tractor supply store. They're about $23. They're 16 feet long and about 4 feet wide, and they cost about $23. They're readily available, and they're easier to get home than you think, and they're not hard to cut with a bolt cutter. Now, this is a grid pattern of a little over 5 inches, and it works fine for most critters, but if you really wanted extra protection, you could spend about 4 times the money and get what's called goat panels, and you can see here that the grid pattern is much smaller, and that's certainly going to do a better job. If you want to invest in the money, it's probably worth it. But these panels have been indispensable, and they are always in use in my garden to prevent those seeds from being dug up or those seedlings that are newly planted from being disrupted. This does the trick. And then you have those annoying digging critters that want to get into your bed from underneath. And I'm talking mostly about gophers and groundhogs and moles and voles, but there are others. And the best way to prevent them from getting to your plant is using a physical barrier of hardware cloth. Now, hardware cloth is just galvanized wire, and this is an example of that. You can get it at a box store. It comes in a square grid pattern. This happens to be 1 inch square, but you could get a smaller pattern such as a 1/2 inch, and that's really good for keeping even the smallest critters out. But you use this in your raised bed. So what I'm showing you here is really my compost sifter, but pretend it's a raised bed, and it looks pretty much like that. So you got your perimeter of the bed, and then you staple that hardware cloth in place before you fill it, of course, and then that secures it. And that does a great job of keeping those digging pests from being able to get up and into the plants. But there's one more thing that you can do to really be effective, and that is to extend the hardware cloth out beyond the perimeter of your frame by about 1 foot and just under grade. And when you do that, as the digging pest comes up to your bed and they start to dig, they're going to encounter that hardware cloth about 1 foot before they even get to the bed, and that's a really great deterrent from stopping them from being able to get in and doing their damage. And one final thought. If you're dealing with climbing mammals, you know what I'm talking about, chipmunks, squirrels, raccoons, the only way that you're going to keep them out is not only a physical barrier around your plants, but something that covers the top too, to prevent them from going up and over. Their climbing ability is unbelievable, and you're not going to keep them out unless you completely enclose your plants. That's the only way to keep them at bay.